Alan and Denise, a love story, narrated by Lewis Thorne, written, produced and directed by Barron. Prologue. Begin at the end, because the end is the only place you can finally see the whole shape of the thing. Nissan Stadium, Nashville, on a warm night at the close of June in the year 2026. 80,000 people are on their feet under a wide summer sky, and every last one of them has come to say goodbye to a tall, quiet man from Newnan, Georgia. They have sung his river song, and his jukebox song back at him until the walls shook. They have watched the royalty of country music walk out, one after another, to lay a verse at his feet. And now the noise drops away, and a slow, unhurried melody starts up, and the man does the one thing nobody in that stadium will ever forget. He reaches out his hand, and he brings his wife into his arms, and the two of them begin, very slowly, to dance. I want you to know something before we go a single step further. That woman he is holding is not scenery. She is the whole story. 50 years earlier, she was a 16-year-old girl in a booth at a Dairy Queen, watching a boy too shy to cross the floor toward her. And everything, every song and every number one and every roaring improbable year of it, was only ever the long walk from that booth to this dance. I could not tell you exactly what he whispers to her when the music finds its feet. That belongs to them. It always has. What I can tell you is the road that got them here, the whole distance of it, the sweet parts and the near ruin and the mending that came after, because the two people turning slowly in that light chose, in their own words and their own time, to leave the map out where the rest of us could find it. This is a love story. It has burnt toast in it, and a mailroom, and a betrayal, and a faith that would not let go. It is worth the walk. Let me take you back to the front door. Part 1. The Front Door. Chapter 1. Denise, the boy at the Dairy Queen. Every love story has a front door. Hers happened to have a walk-up window. Newnan, Georgia, 1976. A Dairy Queen at the edge of a small southern town. And if you have never been 16 in a place like Newnan, I want you to know that a Dairy Queen is not a restaurant. It is a courthouse, a clubhouse, and a stage. On a warm night in Coweta County, everybody who is anybody under the age of 18 is there, because there is nowhere else on earth to be. She was 16, Denise. She was there the way 16-year-old girls have always been there, tucked in a booth with her friends, a dish of soft serve going to soup in front of her because the conversation mattered more than the ice cream ever could. And she noticed him because he was impossible not to notice. There were 6 feet and 4 inches of him. A lean, quiet country boy, the youngest of 5 and the only son, raised with 4 older sisters in a house his family had built out from his grandfather's old tool shed. A boy who loved cars more than he loved talking, who would rather be underneath a Ford than in front of a crowd. Remember that last part. 15 years from that night, it would become one of the great jokes God ever played, and Denise would be the only person in Coweta County who saw the setup coming. What did he say when he finally crossed that floor? I could not tell you the exact words, and I will not pretend otherwise. Their first sentences belong to the two of them and to a summer night 50 years gone. But you have been 16, or you will be, or you love someone who was, so you already know the scene by heart. The too long look, the walk that takes 100 years, the tall boy discovering that every word he had ever known has quietly left town without him. Here is the funny thing, and it is the first clue to everything. He was not smooth. He had no line. The famous story the family has never once managed to live down is that early on, before he was even properly her boyfriend, This boy dropped a penny down the front of her blouse and asked, with a perfectly straight face, whether he might have it back. There is not a charm school in the American South that would sign off on that maneuver. It should have ended the whole thing on the spot. Instead, Denise laughed, and 50 years of history turned on the laugh. Because she could already read him. That was her gift, arriving early. She understood at 16 that the penny was not a line and the shyness was not indifference. It was a boy overflowing with something he had no vocabulary to deliver, reaching for any language that was not language, mischief, motion, surprise, because the ordinary one had failed him. She was the first person alive who never needed him to talk. You have to picture the world they were standing in, because the world is half the story. Georgia in the middle of the 1970s, red clay and pine, a county where the church steeple and the water tower were the two tallest things for miles, and everybody's grandfather had farmed something. A boy measured his standing by what he could do with an engine, and this particular boy could coax an old motor back to life, the way some men calm a frightened dog. That was courtship in Newnan in that year. Grease on his hands, a car that ran, a Saturday night, and somewhere to drive. Her people were Newnan people. Church on Sunday, grace over supper, the front porch light left on for whoever was still out. I could not tell you the color of the booth she sat in that summer night, or the song playing, and I will not invent them, because the small true things are exactly the ones worth guarding. But I can tell you the shape of a girl like that in a town like that. Up early, hair still damp, a piece of toast eaten standing at the kitchen counter before the drive to church. Schoolwork spread across the breakfast table under a hanging lamp. A mother who wanted to know who the tall Jackson boy was and whether he had any prospects worth the name. And here is what that girl could not have told her mother because she had no evidence anyone would accept. She had heard something, not a promise, not a plan, nothing you could write down. A voice once in a car. Most 16-year-olds fall for a face or a car or a way of leaning against a wall. Denise fell for a sound and then spent 50 years being right about it. She was content, even then, to be the only person in Coweta County who knew the secret, for as long as it took the rest of the world to catch up. It would take the rest of the world a very long time. And Denise, 16 and steady, looked at the tallest and quietest boy in the room and saw, before there was one shred of evidence to see it by, a whole country folded up inside him. The rest of the world would need another decade and a half and a stack of number ones to hear what she heard in a booth over a melting dish of ice cream. She heard it first. She always did. A word about the town, because Newnan made these two as surely as they made each other. Coweta County in those years was a place where everybody knew everybody's business and mostly wished them well in it. The Dairy Queen sat where the young people naturally pooled on a hot night, the way water finds the low spot. There was no mall, no multiplex, no glowing screen in every pocket to keep a person home and alone. If you wanted to be near other people your age, you went where they were, and where they were was that walk-up window. So the odds were always going to put these two in the same lit-up parking lot eventually. What the town could not have arranged, and did not see coming, was that the shyest boy in it and the steadiest girl in it would look at each other across that lot and both quietly decide. The town supplied the parking lot. They supplied the rest. This is the story of what she saw, and of what it would cost her and pay her to be exactly right about him. Chapter 2. Alan, the penny, and the back seat. Now turn the booth around and look out through his eyes, because the boy at the Dairy Queen has been badly misfiled by history, and it is time somebody corrected the record. The world would eventually decide that Alan Jackson was a natural, a man born easy in front of a crowd. I am here to tell you that the boy was, in plain fact, terrified. He was the only son in a house full of women, a mechanic in his heart before he was anything else, happiest flat on his back under a car with a wrench in his hand, and nobody expecting him to make conversation. Talk was the one currency he had been born without. And he had just seen, across a crowded Dairy Queen, the one girl he most needed to talk to, and discovered that his voice had abandoned him entirely. So he did what a boy does when his nerve arrives all at once, having saved up for weeks and then spent everything in a single reckless transaction. He dropped a penny down her blouse. I'm not making this up, and neither, mercifully, did he. He asked for it back. It is the single least suave thing a young man has ever done in the state of Georgia, and I love him for it, because it tells you the truth about him before the fame got a chance to lie. Here is another one the family kept. One night at that same Dairy Queen, he folded all 6 feet and 4 inches of himself down into the back seat of her car in the dark and waited. When Denise pulled out onto the road, up he came like a jack-in-the-box. A girl with less humor about her would have driven into a ditch and pressed charges in that order. Denise laughed instead. God help them both. She laughed, and the quietest boy in Coweta County understood, maybe for the first time, that he had found the one person on the planet fluent in his particular silence. I could not have blamed anybody for underestimating him. Everybody did. He looked like a nice local boy headed for a nice local life, good with his hands, sure to get by. And that was the ceiling on the whole town's imagination, get by, when the truth was already leaving get by so far behind that it would need a telescope to find it again. Because there was a thing inside him that would not sit still. In the evenings, when the work was done, when it was only the two of them and the radio, and a dark Georgia road unrolling ahead, the boy who could not order a milkshake without rehearsing it would open his mouth and sing. And out would come a sound with no strain in it at all, low and easy and unhurried, like a screen door in summer. It was not a trick. It was the truth in the only voice he had. Most men would have needed a stage and a spotlight to let a thing like that out. He let it out in a car at 17 for an audience of exactly 1, because she was the only audience he trusted. I would like to defend him for a moment, because the record has been unfair on this point for decades. People look at the stadiums and assume he must always have been easy up there, that the shyness was a marketing story. It was not. Ask anyone who knew him young and they will tell you the same thing, laughing a little as they say it, that Alan Jackson was the last boy in the county you would have picked to end up in front of 80,000 people. He turned red when a teacher called on him. He let his sisters do the talking. He found reasons to be out in the garage when company came, because an engine never expected him to make small talk, and a carburetor never once asked him how he was feeling. That is the boy who dropped the penny, not a smooth operator running a play, but a terrified kid who had exactly one move and made it. And the miracle, the whole miracle the rest of this book depends on, is that the one girl who mattered found the move funny instead of foolish. She laughed. He lived on that laugh for a week. A boy like that does not forget who laughed with him instead of at him. That is the shape of him, established at the start, and never really altered. A man whose courage came in floods or not at all, who said the largest things he had by every available means except the spoken one. The penny, the ambush, and once in a great while, in the dark, the singing. 50 years later, he would still be doing precisely this, only the improvisations would be called songs, and the whole country would be leaning in to listen. The medium kept changing on him. The problem it solved never did. He did not know, that boy, that he was carrying one of the great voices in the history of American music around unopened in his chest, like a letter he was afraid to read. He barely knew it was there. But she knew. She had heard it on the county roads. And a boy who has been truly heard, even once, even by only one person, is a boy who has been handed a reason to be brave. The girl in the booth had just become the ground he would stand on for the rest of his life. He kept driving her the long way home, and the long way home kept getting longer, and neither of them was in any hurry at all, because as far as the town could tell, they had nowhere in particular to go. Chapter 3. Denise, the long way home. 3 years. That is how long the courtship ran, and I want you to sit with that number, because it is the first proof of who these two were. He did not rush her. She did not rush him. They drove the county roads the way small-town couples did in 1976 and 77 and 78, the long way home every time, school dances and shift work, her books and his engines, the same roads driven the same ways inside a few square miles of Georgia. There was the Baptist church on Sundays, which in a town like that is not merely where you worship, but where you are from, the calendar that orders the whole year. There were long summers when the heat sat on the town like a hand. There was nowhere in particular they had to be and no hurry to get there, because nowhere they were going was far. Or so everybody thought. That is the quiet joke folded into those years, and you can only hear it looking backward. To the town, this was a nice local boy taking his time with a nice local girl. Nobody watching those two drive was thinking about arenas, least of all the boy behind the wheel. But Denise, riding shotgun through all of it, was learning something the town could not see from the outside. She was learning the difference between a boy who could not talk and a boy who had nothing to say, and her boy was the first kind. And I cannot overstate what she did with that knowledge, because it is the hinge the whole marriage swings on. Any town has its share of young men who can sing a little. A passable voice and a guitar is not by itself a prophecy. What Denise heard on those dark roads was not merely that he could sing. It was the particular quality of the instrument, a plainness that could not be taught and could not be faked, the sound of a man telling you the truth because he did not know how to do anything else. She heard it at 17, in a car, with nothing to go on but her own 2 ears and her own stubborn conviction. History would eventually agree with her. It just took history another 15 years to catch up. There is a domestic picture I like to keep from those years, though no camera took it. Her mother's kitchen table on a weekend morning, Denise home from wherever the night had taken them, a plate of toast and a cup of coffee going cold while she thought about him. A girl does not go cold on her coffee over a boy who bores her. She goes cold on her coffee over a boy she cannot quite figure out, and she had decided, somewhere in that kitchen, that she was going to spend a good long time figuring this one out. She would tell it later, Riley, that she had fallen for the shyest boy in 3 counties, a boy who communicated in pennies and engine noise, and that she had somehow understood every word of it. That was the joke and the miracle at once. He could not use language, and she was fluent in him without it. The town saw a quiet couple killing time. What was actually happening on those roads was a young woman quietly making the largest bet of her life, on evidence only she could hear. You could have driven those roads behind them for a year and learned nothing, and that is the point. From the outside, it was the dullest courtship in Georgia. A tank of gas from the gas station, a Saturday, a girl and a quiet boy going nowhere in particular and taking their time about it. They would end up on somebody's back porch with the whole county asleep, or parked at the edge of a field with the radio low. To the neighbors, it looked like 2 kids wasting a summer. What was actually happening was an education. She was learning him the way you learn a language by living in the country slowly, without a textbook, until one day you realize you are dreaming in it. She learned that when he went quiet in a certain way, he was not sulking, but composing. She learned that he said more by fixing your car than most boys said with a speech. And she learned, on the nights the radio played something he loved, and he forgot to be shy and sang along under his breath, that she had gotten hold of something rare and had better not let go of it. She joked, much later, that the whole courtship was a girl trying to keep a boy singing long enough to notice he was doing it. He kept coming back. Through the end of high school and past it, through his shifts and his cars and her school days, what had started at a walk-up window in Newnan refused to stay there. The boy from the Dairy Queen kept keeping his promise to the girl in the booth, night after night, without ever once saying the word promise, because promise was a word and words were the thing he did not have. He had something better. He had the long way home, and he drove it faithfully, and she rode beside him and listened, and by the time he finally worked up the nerve to ask the largest question a young man ever asks, she already knew every note of her answer by heart. Chapter 4. Alan, the Christmas Eve question. There is a particular patience a shy man practices, and this one practiced it for 3 years before he dared to ask. Understand the size of the thing he was carrying up to that question. He was not a man who could improvise his way through a big moment on charm. He had watched himself fail at ordinary conversation 1,000 times, and now he had to choose the single most important sentence of his life and get it out of his mouth intact, in front of the one person whose answer could remake or ruin him. For a talker, a proposal is a performance. For Alan Jackson, it was a high-wire act with no net, attempted by a man who had never been sure of his balance. So he chose his moment the way he chose everything, with the instinct of someone who had spent his whole life waiting for the room to get quiet enough. Christmas Eve of 1978, Denise home from her freshman year of college. The one night of the year when the whole world is already holding its breath, so that his question could hide inside the general hush. No stage, no crowd, no spotlight. Only the two of them, and the particular stillness of a southern Christmas Eve, and a question 3 years in the building. I have always found something almost unbearably him about that timing. A louder man proposes at halftime on the stadium screen. Alan Jackson waited for the quietest night of the year and asked her when nobody was looking. He grinned about it later, in the sideways way he had, that he had picked Christmas Eve partly so that if she said no, he could at least blame the shock on the holiday. That was the joke he told on himself, but she did not say no. She said yes at 19, a college freshman with the entire unmarked map of the 1980s waiting out past the county line. And she said it to the boy with grease on his hands and a voice he mostly kept to himself. Think hard about what she was actually betting on, because I could not, in good conscience, let you rush past it. She was not betting on a star. There was no star to bet on. His largest nameable ambition was to keep body and soul together in Coweta County. She was betting on him, plain, the man and not the prospects, which is the only bet that has ever really counted and the hardest one on earth to explain to anybody standing outside it. And he knew what he was being given. This is the part people miss about the quiet ones. They feel the enormous things fully, they simply cannot narrate them. When Denise said yes, a boy who had spent his whole life braced for the world to overlook him got handed proof that one person, the right one, had looked and stayed. He did not have the words to tell her what that meant. He never would. He would spend the next 50 years trying to say it by other means, and one of those means, decades down the road, would fill a stadium. But it started here, on a cold Georgia Christmas Eve, with the shyest boy in 3 counties finally spending every ounce of nerve he owned on 5 terrifying words, and a girl who had known the answer since she was 17. Let me linger on the shy man's arithmetic, because it is a kind of heroism the world never claps for. A confident boy walks up and asks, and lets the chips fall. This boy had to build the courage the way he built everything, part by part, over weeks, testing it, tightening it, afraid the whole assembly would seize up at the worst possible moment. He had watched his own tongue betray him 1,000 times. He had no reason to trust it now, with the largest question of his life loaded into it. And there is something tender under that, which I could not leave out. A boy who is sure the world will overlook him does not assume the girl will say yes. He assumes, if anything, that she will finally come to her senses and choose somebody who can talk. So the question he carried up to that Christmas Eve was not only, will you marry me? Underneath it, unspoken, was the more frightened question every shy person asks. Are you certain it is me you want, when you could have had easier? She was certain. She had been certain since she was 17 and heard him sing in the dark. When she said yes, she was answering the question under the question, the one he could never have made himself ask out loud. And he heard both answers at once, and it undid him a little, in the good way. He had asked. She had said yes. There is a practical fact hiding under the romance of that Christmas Eve, and it is worth saying plainly because it makes the yes braver. They had no money. A proposal for a young man in his position was not a diamond in a velvet box and a violinist hired for the evening. It was a promise backed by nothing but himself, offered by a boy who fixed cars for a living to a girl still in college. He was not asking her to share a fortune. He was asking her to share the risk of a life that had, on paper, almost nothing going for it yet. And she looked at the whole unpromising arithmetic of it, the empty bank account, and the uncertain future, and the husband-to-be who could barely finish a sentence at a party. And she said yes to all of it gladly, because she was not marrying the arithmetic. She was marrying him. Almost a year would pass between the question and the wedding, a year of saving and planning and two families getting used to the idea, and at no point in it did she reconsider. She had made up her mind on a county road at 17. Christmas Eve was only the paperwork of the heart. Now 2 kids from Newnan had a wedding to get to, and almost nothing in the world to bring to it except each other. Chapter 5. Denise, 2 kids and a Baptist church. They were married on December the 15th, 1979, at the First Baptist Church in Newnan, the town that had watched the whole thing from the very first melting dish of soft serve. He was 21. She was 19. Picture that church on a December Saturday. The pine and the red clay gone cold outside. The sanctuary warm and full of people who had known both these children since before they could walk. The groom too tall for every suit he had ever borrowed, standing up front before God and Coweta County, watching the doors at the back for the moment they would open. And then they opened, and there she was, and I promise you the tall boy forgot every word he had ever known all over again, which was fine, because he was not going to need any. Between them that day, they had a little schooling, a great deal of certainty, and almost nothing else. No house to speak of. No prospects a banker would bless. If you had stopped the wedding guests on the church steps afterward and asked them to wager on the couple's future, the smart money would have said, they will be all right, 2 hard-working kids. He is good with cars and she is steady and bright. They will get by. That was the ceiling on the imagination in the room. Nobody in that building was dreaming as big as the truth. Notice what they did not have, because it is the whole measure of what they did. There was no lavish honeymoon, no down payment on a dream house waiting, no wealthy family standing by to cushion the early years. There was a young couple, a rented start, a car, and a pair of jobs. In a certain light, it looks like the least promising launch imaginable. In the truer light, it was the strongest possible one, because it meant that whatever they built, they would build together from nothing. and would both know exactly what it had cost and who had paid it. The first small apartment had a small kitchen and a smaller budget, and she learned to stretch a grocery run the way he learned to stretch a paycheck, and neither of them thought of it as deprivation, because they had never known anything else and had each other besides. Couples who start with everything sometimes never find out whether they would have chosen each other with nothing. These two started with nothing and chose each other every single day, which is how you end up, half a century on, dancing in a stadium and meaning it. A wedding, when you strip away the flowers and the hymns, is a bet placed in public. It is a declaration, in front of witnesses, that you are staking the rest of your one life on the person across from you, outcome unknown. Most of the congregation was betting on two nice local kids and a quiet local life. Denise, alone in the building, may have been betting on something larger, not because she had proof, but because she had ridden the dark county roads and heard what came out of him when no one else was listening. The vows were the standard ones. Better, worse, richer, poorer, sickness, health. Nobody believes at 19 that the words are load-bearing, that they are not decoration but architecture, the actual beams the next 50 years will hang from. These two would come to test every clause of that contract. The richer, beyond anything they could have pictured in that little church. The worse, nearly to breaking, in a way that would one day be printed in a book and read by strangers. And at the very last, the sickness, danced with, slowly, in front of 80,000 witnesses under a summer sky. But all of that was a long way down the road from a December Saturday in 1979. There is a detail I love here, and it is a domestic one. Outside the church in the cold, there was a car running, warming up for the getaway, and of course it was running because he had tuned it himself. He was not a man who would leave his bride to climb into a cold car. The funny part is that tuning the engine was, for him, a love letter. He could not have written her a poem to save his life. But he could make sure the car started on the first try in the December cold, and in his language that meant exactly the same thing. I have officiated this scene in my imagination more times than I can count, because it is the hinge the whole 50 years hangs on, and it deserves to be seen slowly. Two families filling the pews, folks who had traded these two children back and forth across the same few streets their whole lives. The women who had watched Denise grow up now dabbing at their eyes. The men who had hired the Jackson boy to fix their trucks nodding at him from the aisle like he was already one of them, which he was. And nobody, not one soul in that warm sanctuary, was dreaming the right size. They were happy for two nice kids. They pictured a small house nearby, Sunday dinners, grandchildren someday courting at the same Dairy Queen. It was a lovely, modest, entirely wrong forecast. I cannot fault them for it. You do not look at a shy mechanic and a flight attendant in a borrowed suit and a homemade dress and predict stadiums. There would be time enough later for a kitchen table of their own, and burnt toast on rushed mornings, and a screen door that banged. For now, there was only one person in the building quietly betting bigger, and she was too busy walking down the aisle to say so. They drove away from that Baptist church with everything they owned in the world, and no earthly idea what they were carrying. I cannot call that a tragedy. That is how it is supposed to work. If either of them had known, on that afternoon, everything the vows would eventually be asked to hold, the fame and the strain and the crack and the mending and the long last dance, they might have been too frightened to say the words at all. Mercifully, the biggest moments of a life do not announce themselves. They let you say yes in the dark, and only later show you what you agreed to. Part 2. The Climb. Chapter 6. Alan, the Georgia Years. Here is where the movie version wants to hurry. Wedding, then, cut, the arena, the lights, the screaming crowds. There is no honest telling of this marriage that skips what came in between, because what came in between is where the marriage was actually made. Before there was an Alan Jackson the world had heard of, there were years. Long, ordinary, uncelebrated Georgia years in which two young people simply tried to make a living and stay in love while doing it. They did not have much. What they had was work. He took the jobs a strong, capable young man takes in a southern town when he has a wife and a future to feed and no diploma from anywhere fancy. Jobs with his hands. Jobs that left him tired. The honest and unglamorous kind that a house built out from a tool shed prepares a man to respect rather than resent. Let me be specific about the work, because vague admiration does him no justice. This was a young man doing hard physical labor by day, the kind that leaves your hands rough and your back tired. The honest jobs a strong country boy takes when he has a household to keep and no fancy paper to his name. He did construction and odd work and whatever paid. He came home worn out. And then, worn out, he picked up the guitar because the thing in him would not accept tired as an excuse. Most men, and I mean no insult by it, would have earned the right to collapse in front of the television. He earned that right too and declined it night after night for years because a talent that large does not let its owner rest easy. It itches. It insists. It kept after him until he answered it. Nobody was paying him to sing. Singing was the thing he did after the day was over, and it would not leave him alone. That is the part that separates this story from 1,000 others just like it. Plenty of young men can carry a tune around a campfire and are content to leave it there. This one could not. In the evenings, he sang in Georgia bars with a band for tips and beer money and the pure need to do it, in front of rooms that had come out to drink and dance and were not, most nights, paying him any particular mind. I want you to see him honestly in those rooms because it is the least glamorous picture in this book and the most important. A tall, plain, married mechanic singing his heart out to people arguing over a pool table. He was, by his own later admission, terrible at working a crowd. He could not banter. He could not sell himself. He would just plant his boots, hold the microphone like a wrench, and sing the truth until the room, almost against its will, went quiet. He joked afterward that his entire stage act in those years was to stand very still and hope. The joke was funnier because it was accurate. Meanwhile, Denise did something that would turn out to matter enormously, though nobody could have known it at the time. She took a job that put her in motion. She became a flight attendant. Consider what that made her. Poised, quick, easy with strangers, at home in the wider world in exactly the way her husband was not. He was rooted. She had wings and a uniform and a route that carried her out past the county line and back, and a paycheck that came whether or not anyone clapped for him on a Saturday night. Hold that fact. It is a loaded gun on the mantle, and it will go off. For now these were the quiet years, and they deserve their due because a marriage is mostly made of quiet years. His day work and her flights, his bar gigs and her steady wages, the two of them building the unremarkable scaffolding of an ordinary life. Rent, groceries, a car that ran, Sunday church. The slow accumulation of a shared history, the inside jokes and the small routines, the 10,000 unrecorded evenings that are the actual substance of a marriage, and that no biography can ever get at, because they were written down nowhere but in the two people who lived them. Money was the constant weather of those years, the thing you woke up to and went to sleep under. They watched it the way you watch a low fuel gauge on a long drive, doing the math at the supermarket, deciding which bill could wait another week. She did the laundry at night after her flights, and he came in smelling of the shop, and they ate cheap and laughed about eating cheap, because laughing about it was free and they had a good deal of it to spend. I want to be careful not to gild this. It was not a hardship romance out of a movie. It was tiring, and tiring in the specific way that grinds couples down, and plenty of marriages do not make it through a stretch like it. What carried these two was not that the struggle was beautiful. It was that they had decided, without ever holding a meeting about it, that they were on the same side of the struggle. He sang for beer money in rooms that ignored him, and came home, and she was glad to see him and meant it, and that gladness was worth more than the tips. A man will keep chasing an impossible thing for a very long time if there is one person at home who does not think it is impossible. And underneath it all, unspoken most of the time, a dream that would not die. He kept singing. She kept believing. Alan Jackson was not, by nature, a man who bet on himself. Shy men rarely are. He would have kept working with his hands and singing on the side and calling it a good enough life, and it would have been a good enough life, and the world would never have heard him. Denise was not going to let it be enough. She was waiting, though she may not have known she was waiting, for the one stranger who could change everything to walk into her field of view. He was going to, in an airport, and she was going to do the bravest thing anybody in this whole story ever does. Chapter 7. Denise, the stranger at the airport. Every legend has a hinge. One small moment the whole thing swings on. There may be no hinge in the history of country music quite like this one, because the star was not even in the building. The hinge of Alan Jackson's entire career is a conversation his wife had at an airport. Set the scene, 1985. 6 years married now, and the quiet boy from the Dairy Queen is still a working man with a dream he cannot get anyone in the industry to look at. He has the songs. He has the voice. What he does not have is a single soul in Nashville who knows his name. And Nashville, this is the cruel arithmetic of the place, does not come looking for shy men in Newnan. A talent that is never heard by the right person is, as a practical matter, no talent at all. Denise, meanwhile, is at work, in her uniform, moving through an airport the way she had moved through 100 airports. And one day she looks up and recognizes a face every American of a certain vintage knew on sight: Glenn Campbell. The rhinestone cowboy himself, a genuine star of the first magnitude, one of the most famous singers alive, standing right there, an ordinary traveler minding his own business. Now pause, because this is the whole book in a single frame. 9 years earlier, a boy could barely cross a Dairy Queen floor to speak to the girl in the booth. Denise has spent those 9 years learning, in the marrow, exactly what that boy is worth. And so, standing in that airport, she does the thing her husband could not have done for himself in 1,000 years, the thing that ran flatly against her own natural modesty too. She walks up to a legend, a total stranger, one of the biggest names in American music, and she tells him about her husband. I have tried to imagine the nerve that took, and I cannot quite get to the bottom of it. It is one thing to believe in a man in the privacy of your own certainty. It is another thing entirely to walk up to a famous stranger in a crowded airport and say it out loud, with your uniform on and a job to get back to, risking the small humiliation every modest person fears, the polite blank smile, the practiced brush-off. She risked it anyway. She was not the type to make a scene. She made this one. Their exact words belong to that airport and that afternoon, and I will not invent them. But the upshot survives, because Denise herself has told the story over the years. Campbell was kind. He did not brush her off. Have your husband put together a demo, he told her, and send him to see Marty, meaning Marty Gamblin, who ran Campbell's music publishing office in Nashville. It was, on Campbell's end, the gracious reflex of a decent famous man, the sort of thing a star might say a dozen times a year and forget by supper. He had no way of knowing that this particular flight attendant was not exaggerating. It is almost absurd, when you lay it out, that the entire future of one of country music's defining careers rode on a busy legend deciding to be polite for 30 seconds to a stranger with a uniform and a conviction. Marty Gamblin's name belongs in this book, because Glenn Campbell's kindness would have evaporated without a second decent man on the other end of it. Campbell told Denise to send her husband to see Marty, who ran his publishing office, and Marty was the one who actually opened the door and let the tall Georgia stranger in. That is how a career gets made, when you look at it honestly. Not one lightning bolt, but a short chain of ordinary people choosing, each in turn, to be generous to a nobody. A flight attendant with the nerve to speak, a legend with the grace to answer, a publisher with the ear to listen and the willingness to take a meeting that promised him nothing. Pull any single link out of that chain and there is no career, and the finest voice of his generation dies quietly in a Georgia bar, and you never hear it. The chain held. It held because his wife forged the first link out of pure conviction in a crowded terminal. The demo got made, the meeting got taken, and the boy who had no one in Nashville, no connections, no leverage, no way in, suddenly had a songwriting deal with Glenn Campbell's own publishing company. It was modest money, an apprenticeship's wage, not a fortune, but that misses the point entirely. In Nashville, a foot in the door is the whole game. Thousands of people spend their whole lives trying to get one meeting with one person who can actually do something. And here, a Georgia mechanic with a beautiful voice had gotten exactly that, because his wife had the nerve to speak up. Understand what modesty she had to override to do it, because it makes the moment braver, not less. Denise was not a woman who pushed to the front of a line or made herself the loudest voice in a room. She had been raised to be gracious, to wait her turn, to not impose. Everything in her training told her to leave the famous man alone with his coffee and his privacy. And she walked up anyway, heart going, and spoke, because there was a thing she believed more than she believed in her own good manners. That is the exact definition of courage, by the way. Not the absence of fear or the absence of shyness, but doing the frightening thing because something matters more than the fright. She had the shyness in her too, the same family shyness, the same small-town instinct not to make a fuss. She simply decided in one airport, on her feet, in her uniform, that her husband's whole future was worth one moment of making a fuss. I have thought a great deal about that decision, and I cannot find the bottom of how much it cost her or how much it bought. That same year, they packed up their Georgia life and moved north to Nashville, Tennessee. For the rest of his life, the world would call Alan Jackson a natural, a man who came out of nowhere. The record says otherwise. The record says he was found, the way he was always found, from the Dairy Queen forward. She saw him first at 16. She heard him first on the county roads. And in an airport in 1985, she finally made the rest of the world start to look. Chapter 8. Alan, the mailroom years. The move to Nashville did not come with a soundtrack of triumph. It came with a mailroom. Here is where the fantasy of the music business collides with the reality of it. In the fantasy, you sign a deal and the arena is waiting. In the reality, the songwriting contract Alan Jackson carried up from Georgia paid like exactly what it was, a starter's wage, enough to say you were in the game, but nowhere near enough to live on. So the future Country Music Hall of Famer did what a responsible married man does. He got a day job. He went to work at the cable network that beamed country music into living rooms all across the country, and his duties there consisted of sorting and hauling the mail. Let that picture develop. Down the corridors of a building entirely devoted to the manufacture of country stardom walked a 6'4" Georgia boy that nobody looked at twice, pushing a cart, delivering the mail, invisible as furniture, a man with one of the great voices of his generation sitting unused in his chest while he memorized which office got which envelope. He was, in the most literal way imaginable, inside the building where the dream lived and outside the room where it was happening. Close enough to hear it through the wall, not yet close enough to touch it. There is a kind of man this would have curdled. Nashville is famously full of them. The almost made its nursing a grievance at the end of a bar, certain the town owes them something it is never going to pay. Alan Jackson never seems to have been in any danger of it, and I could not tell you a more important fact about his character. Part of it was the raising. A boy brought up in a house built out from a tool shed, taught from the cradle that you work with what is in front of you, and you do not consider honest labour an insult, does not come apart because the honest labour available to him this year is a mail cart. He had hauled worse and complained less. He liked to say, dryly, that the mailroom was the only job he ever had where nobody asked him to talk, which suited him fine. The joke had a flaw of real gratitude under it. But the larger part of what kept him steady was waiting for him on the other side of the front door every night. He came home, in those years, to the one audience on earth that had never needed convincing. And I want you to know what home actually looked like, because it was not romantic. It was a small kitchen and a cheap table and a coffee cup he refilled too many times, a notebook full of songs, and a wife who came in off her flights and helped keep the lights on with her own paychecks while he wrote. He wrote constantly. Songs by the dozen, songs by the 100, the way you have to, because songwriting is a numbers game and the numbers are merciless. Days with the mail, nights with the guitar and the notebook. Demos recorded and pitched and passed over. Doors that opened an inch and shut. And the almosts were teaching him. This is the hidden mercy of a slow start, and you can hear it plainly in everything he made later. Songs built clean, plain-spoken, no wasted parts, no showing off. The work of a man who had learned engines before he learned choruses and never lost the mechanic's respect for a thing that is built to run. He was not able to be in a hurry, and it is one of the oldest ironies of any trade that the delay which feels like punishment turns out, in the end, to be the education. 4 years in the wilderness of music, Rowe taught Alan Jackson to write like Alan Jackson. A faster success would have made a lesser artist. There is a picture from those mailroom years I keep returning to, and it has no fame in it at all. A tired man home after a day of hauling other people's envelopes, sitting at a cheap table with a guitar and a coffee cup gone cold beside him, working a single line over and over until it sat right. No audience. No promise anyone would ever hear it. Only the stubborn nightly labour of a craftsman who could not stop, in a small apartment, while his wife slept because she had an early flight. That is where the famous voice actually got made, not on a stage. At that table on those nights, in that patient, unglamorous grind. When you hear those clean early hits later and marvel at how effortless they sound, remember the cold coffee and the crossed out lines. Effortless is the most expensive sound in music. He paid for it in the dark, one night at a time for years, and nobody was clapping. And through all of it, the marriage held. You have to keep saying that, because it is easy to lose the marriage inside the career story, and the marriage is the point. These were years of a young couple far from home, short on money, long on rejection, the husband hauling mail by day and chasing a maybe by night. That is the kind of season that quietly ends a great many marriages, not with a bang, just with an erosion. It did not end this one. If anything, it welded it. They were broke together and hoping together, and they had been broke together and hoping together for so long by then that it had simply become who they were. Chapter 9. Denise, the long bet. There is a version of this story that gives the wife a single brave scene at an airport and then sends her to the background to fold the laundry while the man becomes a legend. I refuse to tell it that way because it is not true. Denise Jackson's bravest act was not the 30 seconds with Glenn Campbell. It was the 4 years after it. Faith is cheap when it costs nothing. Hers cost plenty, and she paid it week after week on nothing sturdier than what she had heard in a car on a Georgia road when they were young. Look closely at what she was actually doing in the mailroom years. She was not a woman of leisure indulging a hobbyist husband. She was a working wife carrying real weight, flying real routes, watching a real budget, in a strange city far from her mother and her church, and everyone she had grown up beside. Every dollar of hers that went to keep the two of them afloat, while he wrote another song that might go nowhere, was a dollar bet on a maybe. I want you to know how unglamorous belief actually looks, because the movies always get it wrong. Belief is not a soaring speech. Belief is a tired woman coming in off a late flight, dropping her keys on the kitchen counter, looking at a stack of bills and a husband bent over a notebook, and deciding again, quietly, for the 10,000th time, that the voice she heard at 17 was worth another week of this. There was no applause for that decision. Nobody was filming it. She made it alone, over and over, in a small apartment far from home, and the whole towering career that followed stood on top of those unwitnessed choices like a cathedral on a foundation nobody ever sees. She laughed about it later, in the gentle way of people who have survived something. She said she had married a man who could not talk and then moved to a city where she did not know a soul. So for a while, the quietest man in Tennessee and the loneliest woman in it were, at least, well matched. That was the joke. Under the joke was a real cost, and she paid it without a word of complaint that anyone ever recorded. And here is the thing about her steadiness that I find almost unbearable to consider. It was not certainty of success. She did not know he would make it. Nobody could know that. The odds said he would not. The odds said he was one more talented nobody in a town drowning in talented nobodies, and that she was one more loyal wife about to spend her best years subsidizing a dream that the market would never buy. She bet against those odds anyway, not because she had proof. Because she had heard him, and she had decided that a voice like that was not supposed to die unheard in a Georgia bar, and she was willing to be wrong in the most expensive possible way rather than not find out. Picture the daily texture of that faith, because faith in the abstract is easy to admire and easy to misunderstand. It was not a woman gazing serenely into the middle distance, certain of glory. It was a woman who dropped the keys on the kitchen counter after a red-eye, too tired to stand, and looked at the bills and the notebook and the quiet man scratching at a dream and chose him again anyway. Some nights, she surely wanted to shake him and ask when the maybe would become a paycheck. Some nights, she surely forgot the whole grand belief entirely and only wanted to sleep. Faith that never wobbles is not faith. It is a postcard. Hers wobbled and held, week after week, which is the only kind that counts. And she was doing it far from home. That part gets lost. She had traded her home church and the whole warm net of Newnan for a strange city where the one familiar face belonged to a man who could not discuss his feelings if you paid him. She built a life out there on her own nerve. She joked, years later, that she had moved to Nashville for a husband who was never home and a career that did not yet exist, and had somehow ended up glad she did. Staying, it turns out, is the most underrated love story there is. That is a kind of courage the world has no trophy for. The airport took nerve, the loud kind, the kind that makes a good story. This took the other kind, the nerve you spend in installments, in the dark, with no one watching and no guarantee at the end of it. She had shown the loud kind once. She showed the quiet kind for 4 straight years. And when the first big yes finally came, It came exactly the way she had always insisted it would, if only the right person would listen. She had been right at the airport. She had been right on the county roads at 16. She had been right through the mailroom years when being right looked, from the outside, a lot like being stubborn. The long bet was about to pay, and it was going to pay in a way that neither of them was remotely ready for. Chapter 10. Alan, first artist signed. In 1989, a decision got made in a boardroom that would end the mailroom years for good. The decision belonged to a record label called Arista, a powerhouse out of New York with no history whatsoever in country music. Arista had decided to change that. It was going to open a Nashville division and plant a flag in country, and a brand new label with a brand new mission needs, before anything else, a first artist. The signature signing, the debut act, the bet the whole enterprise will be measured against. Get the first one right, and you are a serious company. Get it wrong, and you are a punchline. There is no more important signing a new label ever makes than its first. Out of every hungry singer in that crowded town, and Nashville in the late 80s was thick with them, beautiful and talented and desperate, waiting tables and hauling mail, and praying for exactly this phone call. The artist Arista Nashville chose to build its whole reputation on was the tall, quiet man from the mailroom. First artist ever signed to the label. The mail hauler chosen to carry the flag. It is tempting to call it luck, and Jackson himself, modest to the point of self-erasure, would very likely let you call it that. Do not. Record labels do not stake new divisions on luck. They bet on what they can hear, and what they could hear when this particular Georgia boy opened his mouth was a voice that sounded like Sunday dinner and a stack of songs about actual life, written by a man who had unmistakably been living one. The very ordinariness that Nashville had overlooked in him for 4 solid years turned out, in the right ears, to be the entire product. He did not sound like a pop star pretending to be country. He sounded like the country itself. That was the thing they were buying. He would tell the story later with that sideways grin that his big break came because he was the one guy in town too stubborn to sound like anybody else. It always got a room laughing, and it was true. He had spent 4 years being told he was too plain, too traditional, too much like exactly what he was. And then the plainness became the whole point. Do not let the word luck anywhere near this signing. I have heard it called luck for 30 years, and it makes me want to argue with a room. Luck is a coin. This was a verdict. A brand new label, betting its entire reputation on its first artist, sat in a room and listened to a tall, quiet Georgia man and heard the one thing money cannot manufacture, which is authenticity. He did not sound like anybody's idea of a star. He sounded like the fellow who pumped your gas and meant it when he asked how you were. In a town full of people performing sincerity, here was a man who could only do the real thing because the fake thing required a smoothness he had never possessed. The years of no had been building to exactly this yes, though nobody could have drawn the line at the time. Every rejection had sanded him down to the essential grain. Every passed-over demo had taught him to cut a wasted word. By the time the right ears finally heard him, there was nothing left in the songs but the truth, plainly built, made to run. That is what they signed, not a gamble. The surest thing in the room if you knew how to listen, and they did. Now think about the house he came home to that night, and picture the small, ordinary scene of it, because that is where the real story lives. Not a champagne toast in a skyline restaurant. A kitchen table in a modest place. The good news set down between 2 people who had earned it the hard way over a decade. Denise had been the one keeping faith when there was precious little external evidence to keep faith on. Now the industry itself, cold-eyed and hard to fool, had come around to her long-held private opinion of her husband. Somewhere in that there had to be a deep and quiet vindication, not the loud kind. They were not loud people, but the kind that settles into a marriage and stays. They did not celebrate long because there was no time. A first artist has to deliver a first record, and quickly, and it has to be good. It is worth pausing on how nearly it did not happen even then, because the ending was never guaranteed. That first song out of the gate did not catch. Radio shrugged. In that business, a first release that stalls can be the whole story. The label loses its nerve, the window closes, and a career ends before the public ever learns the name. Plenty of good singers have vanished in exactly that gap. What saved him was that the company held its nerve, and the next song was the right one. And here is a thing I could not leave unsaid. None of it was ever certain, not the boardroom bet, not the flop, not the rescue that followed. The whole towering run turned on a company deciding to believe its own ears for one more try. The first single Arista sent out stalled well short of the top, the kind of stumble that ends a great many new careers before they start. It would be the last time the wider world got a vote against him. Because in 1990 came the song the whole apprenticeship had been building toward, the title track of that first album, a small masterpiece of exactly the plain-spoken, clean-built writing those 4 hard years had taught him to make. It was a song about how life stubbornly refuses to arrange itself the way the movies promise, how out here the endings come harder and nobody hands you a script. It was true, and it was simple, and it was sung in that low, easy screen door voice, and the country heard it and believed every word. It climbed near the very top of the charts, and the tall, quiet man from the mailroom stopped being a secret forever. Part 3. The Crack and the Mending. Chapter 11. Denise, the house filling up. The most important thing that happened to Alan and Denise Jackson in the year 1990 was not a song. It was a daughter. On the 19th of June, the very season the country was learning to say his name, their first child was born. They called her Mattie. And so the years when his voice was conquering every radio in the land began, at home, with all the small, enormous business of a first baby, the sleeplessness, the wonder, the terror, the way a newborn rearranges a household down to its studs. Fame and fatherhood arrived in the same season, in the same house, and from that point forward, the two of them would always be running at once. 3 years later, in the August of 1993, came a second daughter, Alexandra, called Ali from the start. Now the house had 2 little girls in it, and the years when Alan Jackson's records were selling by the tens of millions were, inside his own walls, years of matching socks that would not stay paired, of the high chair and the booster seat, of burnt toast on hurried mornings, and a dishwasher that ran every single night. The world was handing him trophies with both hands. The world was also, in the person of 2 small girls, handing him the only work that would ever matter more than the music. And here is where you have to stop and look hard at Denise, because the world almost never does. The same fame that made Alan a star made Denise something the culture has no trophy for, the keeper of everything the stardom could not touch. He was gone the way touring musicians are gone, not for an evening but for weeks, city after city, the endless grind of the road that is the actual daily life behind every glamorous career in music. And while he was gone, somebody had to be home. Somebody had to raise the 2 little girls, run the house, and manage the whole intricate architecture of a normal family life, so that there would be a normal family life for him to come home to. That somebody was Denise. Think about the asymmetry of it, because it is the quiet injustice tucked inside almost every fame story, and it is rarely told plainly. The crowds got the voice. The magazines got the face. Denise got the 2 in the morning feedings and the fevers and the school schedules and the long solo evenings. She got the minivan and the carpool line and the bedtime story read for the 3rd time because the girls asked. She had been the one who believed in the voice and the one who spoke up at the airport, and now she was the one keeping the home fires so thoroughly banked that her husband could go off and become a legend and still have somewhere real to come back to. Every star has someone doing this. Very few of the someones ever get a book. I will not tell you it was easy, because I promised you at the start I would not lie in these pages. 2 little girls asking when Daddy is coming home is a hard thing to answer over and over for years. A marriage conducted largely by long distance, one partner in the spotlight and the other in the laundry room, is a marriage under a specific and grinding kind of strain, no matter how much love is underneath it. But for a good while, in the first flush of it, the love held easy and the strain stayed manageable. Let me give you the days themselves, because the days are where the heroism actually lived, and nobody wrote them down. The cereal spilled across the breakfast table at 7 in the morning, while she hunted 2 matching socks that had no intention of being found. The minivan and the carpool line, and the wave at the drop-off. Small pajamas warm out of the dryer. A bedtime story read twice because a small voice asked, and then a 3rd time because how do you say no to that? Burnt toast scraped over the sink because the phone rang. The dishwasher humming its nightly song after the girls were finally down. She forgot the school fundraiser form more than once and beat herself up over it more than she should have, and got up the next day and did the whole thing again. This is the Labour No magazine ever photographed and no award ever named. While a nation sang along to her husband, she ran the small republic of a house, mostly alone, with grace and exhaustion in about equal measure. And she did it without letting the girls feel the ache of a father gone. When he called from a hotel 1,000 miles away, she handed the phone to 3 little girls in their pajamas and made his voice feel close, and then she hung up and finished the dishes and the lunches and the whole invisible tomorrow, so that when he came home, there would be a home to come to. There is no trophy for that. There should be a statue. There is a photograph I keep in my head from those years, though I have never seen it on paper. Denise at the kitchen counter at the end of a long day, one girl on her hip and the other underfoot, the radio on, and her own husband's voice coming out of it, singing to a few million strangers about a love that started with nothing. She laughed about that once, the strangeness of it, doing the dishes to the sound of the man she married serenading the whole country while she was the only one in the house. The funny thing, she said, was that the songs were about her, and she was the one person who never got to hear them live. She kept the whole household turning while his voice filled every other house in the nation. And somewhere in all that motion and distance, without anybody meaning it to, something very quiet began to come loose. Chapter 12. Alan, What the Ride Costs. In the August of 1997, a 3rd daughter arrived. They named her Danny Grace, and with her the family was complete. 3 girls now, the house as full of life as a house can be. From the outside, in that year, the Jacksons had everything. The biggest star in country music, a beautiful family, a 3rd healthy baby, more money and more acclaim than 2 kids from Noonan could ever have dreamed of. The outside, as usual, was not the whole truth. Because by the late 90s, underneath the picture, the marriage was in trouble. And there is no honest way to write this book that steps around that, because the 2 people who lived it chose, deliberately, in her own words in her own best-selling book years later, to put it on the record themselves. So I will tell it the way they chose to tell it. Plainly, without appetite for the wound, and always pointed at what the trouble was for, rather than lingering on the trouble itself. Understand first how such a thing happens, because it did not happen because these were bad people. It happened because fame is a solvent. It does its work slowly, invisibly, on the fastenings that hold a marriage together, not with one dramatic blow, but with the long accumulation of 1,000 ordinary erosions. Years of him gone and her home. Years of the world treating him as a monument and her as the monument's caretaker. Years of two people who had known each other since 16 slowly, without meaning to, becoming a little bit strange to one another at the very top of a mountain they had climbed together. They had started out as two broke kids who knew everything about each other. They woke up, somewhere in the success, as two people who had each been living a life the other one was not fully in. This is the peculiar danger of the ride up, and it is exactly the opposite of what anyone expects. Everyone assumes the threat to a young marriage is poverty, the lean years. But the Jacksons had survived the lean years beautifully. The lean years had welded them together. What nearly broke them was the success, the abundance, the distance, the sheer relentless motion of a life that kept them apart while telling them, from every magazine cover and awards stage, that everything was wonderful. Struggle had asked them to hold on to each other. Success asked them, quietly and for years, whether they still would. I have to speak carefully here, because this is the chapter where the golden picture cracks, and I want to be a witness, not a gossip. The strain built the way strain builds, not on any one day you could point to, but as a slow pressure with no single source. And then, at some point in that overloaded season, the vow broke. There was unfaithfulness on Alan's part. Denise would write it herself, years afterward, with a steadiness on the page that still astonishes anyone who reads it. I am not going to dwell on the how of it, because she did not, and it is not mine to enlarge. What matters is that a real wound was dealt to a real marriage, and that everything worth telling in this book is about what these two particular people decided to do with the wreckage once it was on the ground in front of them. There is an almost absurd cruelty in the timing here, a grim joke of the kind novels are too tidy to invent, and it has to be named. The very things that were pulling the marriage apart were the things they had wanted, prayed for, sacrificed years to get. The touring that kept him gone was the success they had bet the whole airport gamble on. The fame that turned him into a monument was the exact prize they had chased up the highway out of Newnan. There was no villain hiding in the story, no single wrong turn to point at. There was only the slow discovery that getting everything you asked for can quietly ask something back. I keep coming back to how ordinary the machinery of it was, because that is the frightening part and the useful part at once. There was no single catastrophe you could circle on a calendar. There was distance and tiredness and 1,000 small absences and two good people who had stopped, without noticing, doing the daily maintenance a marriage runs on. That is how most of them go, not in a lightning strike, in deferred maintenance. The thing you meant to say and did not. The trip you meant to cancel and did not. The evening you meant to protect and let the work eat instead. Add up enough of those, and one day the structure that felt permanent turns out to have been quietly hollowing the whole time. They separated. For several months across 1997 and 1998, the couple that had started at a Dairy Queen, the high school sweethearts, the ones everyone in Newnan had bet on, lived apart. Nobody who has ever been inside a marriage coming apart needs the details narrated, and I will not narrate them. What matters is not the mechanics of how they came apart. What matters, the whole reason this is a love story and not a cautionary tale, is what came next. Most stories like this one end here, with lawyers and a division of the years, and there would have been no shame in it. She chose to stay and fight for it. So did he. And where she found the strength to, what she reached for when the marriage itself had failed her, is the turning point of this entire book. Chapter 13. Denise, the Crack and the Faith. When the thing you have built your whole life around breaks, you find out very fast what you are actually standing on. Denise Jackson, in the wreckage of 1997 and 1998, found out that she was standing on something older and deeper than her marriage. She was standing on her faith. This is the hinge of the whole story, so I have to tell it carefully. When the separation came, when the vow had broken and the golden picture had shattered, and the woman who had believed in this man since she was 16 suddenly had nothing left to believe in on the marriage's own terms, Denise did not, in the first instance, go looking for a way to fix Alan. She went looking for something to hold herself up. And what she has said, plainly and repeatedly in the years since, is that the collapse sent her back to God. That her Christian faith, which had been part of the furniture of her whole Georgia life since childhood, became in that season the actual foundation she stood on when everything else had given way. Read that sequence closely, because the order of it is everything. The faith did not first repair the marriage. The faith first repaired her. Before there was any question of choosing Alan again, there was the more fundamental work of a broken woman being rebuilt from the inside, finding, in her relationship with God, a self that did not depend on being Alan Jackson's wife, a worth that no one else's failure could take from her, a ground to stand on that would hold whether the marriage lived or died. Only a woman standing on that kind of ground could have done what she did next. You cannot choose a marriage freely from a position of desperation. You can only cling. Denise did not want to cling. She wanted to choose. And to choose freely, she first had to be whole on her own. I cannot read this part of her story without being humbled by it, and I will tell you exactly why. Because the easy thing, the human thing, the thing almost anyone would have understood, was to leave. She had every reason and every permission. A great many good marriages do not survive this exact wound, and no one who has stood where Denise stood would judge her for whatever she chose. She did not take the easy exit, and she did not take the desperate clutch either. She took the hardest third road. She did the interior work first, alone with God, until she was strong enough not to need the marriage, and only then, from strength instead of fear, did she turn back around and look at whether she wanted it. Years later, she would give her memoir a title that carried this whole truth folded inside a piece of wordplay, and it is worth pausing on. She called the book It's All About Him. On its face, in a book about a marriage to a famous man, the title looks like it means her husband. It does not, or not only. The him she meant, first and last, was God. That is the theology of the whole ordeal in 4 words. She found herself again in him, and then, restored, standing on her own 2 feet, no longer defined by the wound, she found that she was able, if she wanted to choose her husband again. Not to resume him out of habit or fear or the sheer momentum of 19 years. To choose him, clear-eyed, as a free woman who did not have to. She would say later, almost wryly, that God had to break her open before he could put her back together right, and that she would not wish the breaking on anyone and would not trade the result for anything. That is not the sound of a woman laughing off her pain. It is the sound of a woman who went all the way to the bottom of it and came back with something the rest of us are still trying to find. That is a categorically different thing from simply staying. And the difference is the reason her story has meant so much to so many people who will never sing a note or fill a stadium. A woman who stays because she is afraid to leave has been trapped. A woman who leaves and comes back on her own terms, having first become strong enough not to have to, has forgiven. And forgiveness, the real kind, not the resigned kind, is one of the hardest and rarest things a human being can accomplish. Denise did the interior work that made real forgiveness possible before she ever extended it. The faith came first. The forgiveness grew out of the faith, and the marriage, in time, grew out of the forgiveness. I want to say something to anyone listening who is sitting in their own version of that wreckage right now, because Denise would want me to, and it is the whole reason she ever told it. The road she took is not a trick, and it is not fast. It does not begin with fixing the person who hurt you. It begins, strangely, with letting yourself be rebuilt first, on ground that does not depend on them at all. Only then do you have a self strong enough to decide anything freely. She would insist, if she were telling you this instead of me, that she did not save her own marriage by white-knuckling it. She got put back together by something larger, and the mended marriage was the overflow, not the goal. Make no mistake about where the center of gravity is in this chapter. This is Denise's chapter. The marriage survived first and foremost because one woman, at the lowest point of her life, reached past her husband and passed herself to something larger, was rebuilt by it, and then chose to bring that rebuilt self back to a marriage that had wounded her and offer it a second chance it had not earned. That is not weakness. People who have never had to do it sometimes mistake it for weakness. It is the single strongest act in this entire 50-year story, stronger than the airport, stronger than anything he ever did on a stage. And the whole rest of the book, the songs, the memoir, the last dance under the lights, sits on top of it. Chapter 14. Alan choosing again. Forgiveness is a decision. Rebuilding is a labor. The Jacksons, having made the decision, now took up the labor, and it was the unglamorous kind, the kind no camera ever records and no song can quite capture, the slow, ordinary work of two wounded people learning how to be married to each other all over again. They went to counseling, real counseling, the plain, weekly kind, not a single dramatic breakthrough with the music swelling, but session after session, the patient and often tedious excavation of how two people who loved each other had drifted so far. There is nothing romantic about that work. It is hard and awkward and humbling, and it asks both people to say true things out loud that are much easier left unsaid. A great many couples cannot bear it and quit. The Jacksons did not quit. They sat in the rooms and did the work, and slowly, unspectacularly, the way a bone knits or a field comes back after a hard year, the marriage began to mend. I want to be honest about Alan's part in this, because it is easy to make him the villain of the middle of the book and then quietly forget him for the ending, and that would be a lie. He was never going to out-talk his way back into the marriage. That had never been his instrument, and this was no time to go pretending he had suddenly found it. What he could do was the one thing he had always done. He could show up. Day after day, present and steady and reliable, letting the accumulated weight of showing up say the thing his words never could. It is the same trade he had been running since the Dairy Queen, the boy who dropped the penny because he could not find the sentence. Now, at the hardest moment of his life, he found the sentence the only way he ever really could, by living it. He carried the old family joke about himself all the way into this, the joke that Alan Jackson had never won an argument with words in his life. In the counseling rooms, I imagine that limitation stopped being a joke and started being a kind of grace. He could not talk his way out of what he had done, and he did not try. He could not perform a repentance. He could only be there and keep being there and let the constancy do the arguing. For a man being asked to earn back a broken trust, an inability to make pretty speeches may have been the most honest gift he had. And in the December of 1998, on their anniversary, 19 years, give or take a season, from the wedding at the First Baptist Church in Newnan, Alan and Denise Jackson stood up and renewed their vows. Sit with the weight of that ceremony, because it is not the same ceremony as the first one, though the words are identical. In 1979, 2 children had stood up, and made promises they could not possibly understand, better and worse, richer and poorer, sickness and health. The whole grand contract recited by two kids who believed, as everyone believes at that age, that the words were beautiful decorations rather than load-bearing beams. In 1998, the same two people stood up and said the same words, and this time they knew. This time they had lived the worse. They had tested the vow against a real and specific failure and a real and specific separation, and had come, through faith and forgiveness and a great deal of hard weekly work, out the other side of it. The words meant something in 1998 that they could not possibly have meant in 1979, because now the two people saying them knew exactly how much each clause could be asked to carry, and were saying yes to it anyway on purpose, with their eyes open. There is a thing about renewed vows that only the second time can teach you, and it is almost the opposite of romantic. The first time, the words are a hope. You promise things you have not been tested on in the sweet ignorance of youth. The second time, if you have earned your way back to them, the same words are a report. You are no longer guessing what better or worse might mean. You know exactly what the worse looked like, because you lived in it, and you are choosing the person anyway, with the ignorance burned off. That is a sturdier and stranger kind of love than the wedding kind. It has seen the bottom and picked you regardless. Not many couples are ever handed the chance to mean the vows that completely. These two were, and they took it. Here is what this chapter is not, and it matters to say it clearly. It is not a scandal, softened for the audience. It is a bet, honored. A wedding is a bet placed in public, and everyone who mattered back in that first church had bet on these two lasting. The marriage did not survive because the injury was minor. The injury was not minor, and Denise never once pretended it was. The marriage survived because two people, given every reason and every permission to let it die, decided together that the thing they had built since they were teenagers was worth more than the wound that had been dealt to it. The break, mended, was stronger at the mend. They told almost no one at the time. They were private people, and it was a private matter. But the two of them knew what they were now, and that private knowledge was about to start showing up, quietly and unmistakably, in his songs. A man who has just carried the words better, worse, sickness, health across a real abyss and back does not write about love the same way afterward. He was about to prove that in front of the whole world, twice. First for a wounded country, then for the two of them alone. Part 4. The Long Dance Home. Chapter 15. Denise, where were you? Some songs are written. A few arrive. This chapter is about the morning the biggest one of Alan Jackson's life arrived, unbidden in the dark, and about the woman lying beside him who understood, better than anyone alive, exactly which man it was coming through. The 11th of September, 2001, needs no setting from this book. Everyone old enough carries their own copy of that day, and no writer should presume to add to it. What matters here is what happened in the stunned weeks afterward, in a grieving and disoriented country, to one quiet man in Tennessee who had spent his entire career declining, on principle, to say more than he actually meant. The story, as he has told it, is disarmingly simple. The song came to him in the night. Some weeks after the attacks, in the small hours, he woke with it already moving in him, a melody and words and the shape of the whole thing, and he got up in the dark, careful not to wake the house, and he wrote it down before it could get away. Denise has described that stretch the way a wife describes the private weather of a marriage, the sense of something working in him that he could not talk about, because talking about things was never how it worked with him. He carried the country's grief the way he carried everything, sideways, in silence, until it came out as a song. What he set on the page was not an anthem. It had no fist in it. It planted no flag, called for no vengeance, claimed no special understanding of a thing that no one understood. It was, instead, a series of questions, gentle ones, asked the way one neighbor asks another over a fence, about where each person had been and what each person had felt on that morning when the world stopped making sense. And its chorus contained one of the most quietly radical confessions ever made by a superstar at the height of his powers, an admission, sung to a wounded nation, that he was only a simple man who did not have the answers, only faith and hope and love and the questions themselves. In the November of 2001, at the Country Music Awards, Alan Jackson walked out onto a stage and sang it in public for the first time. What happened in that room, and in the living rooms watching it across a raw and frightened country, is difficult to describe without going misty, so let the aftermath testify in its place. The song went to number 1 and stayed there. It swept the year's awards. And it gave a shattered nation permission to grieve out loud in an ordinary voice, without pretending to understand more than anyone understood. It let people be as small and sad and human as they truly were that autumn. That was the gift. Now here is the thing only Denise could fully see, and the reason this is her chapter and not his. The man who wrote that song was the exact same man from the Dairy Queen. The boy at 16 who could not manufacture a single impressive word to say to a girl in a booth had grown into the one artist in America, guaranteed not to decorate the truth, and when the country needed someone to speak for it, it reached past every silver tongue in the business for precisely that man. His lifelong limitation turned out to be the whole gift, and Denise had known that man for 25 years by then. She had known the humility when it was just shyness. She had known it when it cost them both nearly everything in the very recent past. And she had helped rebuild the man who now stood on that stage, singing the country back towards something like peace. And she knew the cost of the humility the country was now applauding, which the country did not. To a nation, that plain-spoken confession in the chorus sounded like refreshing honesty from a famous man. To Denise, it sounded like the truest thing about the person she had married at 16, the same not pretending that had made him drop a penny instead of finding a line, the same not pretending that had let him sit in a counseling room and not defend himself. The country was falling in love that autumn with a quality she had loved and suffered and rebuilt her whole life around. She watched them discover him, and I imagine she felt the strangest mixture there is, pride and privacy in the same breath, glad the world finally saw it, and quietly aware that they were meeting, in one song, a man it had taken her 25 years to fully know. He would come home from that stretch the way he came home from everything, tired and grateful and short on words, and set his bag down, and it would fall to her, as it always did, to translate the enormity of what had happened into something a family could hold. She was good at that. She had been doing it since the county roads. There is a private irony in the timing that she alone was positioned to feel, and I will not pretend it away. Only a few years earlier, this marriage had very nearly died. Now the whole nation was holding her husband up as the voice of its highest moment. She knew both truths at once, the public monument and the private mending, and she held them together without a word, the way she had held everything together for a quarter of a century. She could have been forgiven a little bitterness. What the record shows instead is something closer to awe. She would say, in that gentle way that could sound almost like laughing, that the country was finally meeting the man she had married at 16. She had simply gotten there first, as she always did, in a booth before there was a single song. Chapter 16. Alan, remember when? He had put the country's grief into a song, and around the same stretch of years, he put his own father's memory into one too. When Eugene Jackson died, the toolshed patriarch who had raised his only son on engines and honest work, Alan did what he did with every large feeling he ever had. He built a song out of it, plainly and without decoration, a song about small hands learning to steer a wheel under patient father's eye, and then the boy grown and his own daughter's small hands on the wheel while he watched. 2 generations in one steering wheel. He could not have stood up and delivered a great eulogy. That was never his instrument. So he handed his father a monument built out of the exact material the man had raised him on, which was not words, but work. But there was one subject left that he had never fully set to music, the largest one, the one at the bottom of everything. He had never written, straight out and start to finish, the story of the marriage itself. In 2003, alone, no co-writer, no appointment on Music Row, none of the industry machinery that usually surrounds a hit, he finally did. He called it Remember When, and I will tell you plainly, it is not really a love song at all. It is a deposition, sworn testimony, set to a melody so unhurried it moves like a porch swing on a summer evening. And the remarkable thing about it, once you know the story this book has been telling, is that the song walks straight through every single stage of it, in order, leaving nothing out. The young love, the vows and the fear and the hope of the early days. The lean years in the little house when they had nothing but each other and made that be enough. And then, this is the line that matters most, and it is the reason the whole song has a spine instead of just a sweetness, the tears. He put the tears in. He wrote, in a song the whole world would hear, about the hard times, about the seasons when they thought they would not make it, about learning to forgive. He put it in himself, with his own name on it, when there was not one soul on earth who would have noticed the omission, except the 2 people who had lived it. Understand what an act of nerve that was, from a man with no nerve for words. He had spent a career unable to say more than he meant. Here, on purpose, he said all of it, and he did the bravest possible version. He did not airbrush the marriage into a valentine. A man who had never faltered writing that song would have made something merely pretty. A man who had faltered, been forgiven, done the hard weekly work, renewed his vows before God, and stayed, that man writing the tears in, that man writing Learn to Forgive with his own signature attached. That is not a valentine. That is a witness statement. He was testifying in front of the entire country to a marriage he had come within an inch of losing and had chosen deliberately to save. He grinned about the whole thing in interviews, saying only that it was about him and his wife, keeping it simple, the way he kept everything simple. He never once told the country how close the song had come to not being true. He just let it be true and trusted people to feel the difference. Think about the specific courage of leaving the tears in. He could have written the pretty version. Nobody on earth would have known the difference or asked for more or missed the harder verse. A lesser man, or simply a more guarded one, writes the valentine and banks the hit and protects the myth. Alan Jackson, who protected everything, who kept a diagnosis secret for 10 years rather than make a fuss, chose in this one case to be openly, permanently honest in front of the whole country about the fact that his marriage had once nearly broken and had learned to forgive. He signed his name to it. He put it where it could never be taken back. For a private man, that was not a lyric. It was a confession and a monument in one, and he built it on purpose. And then the song keeps walking, straight on down the length of a whole marriage. The babies arriving, the family growing, the children becoming the best part of them, right through to the far end of it, the grey hair coming, the 2 of them old together, and the quiet closing promise that when it is all over and they are looking back from the very end, they will remember whether or not they were loved. It is 50 years of a marriage, forecast from the middle of it, by a man famous for saying only exactly what he means. He was, in effect, writing the ending of this book 23 years before it happened. He just could not have known yet how literally the last verse would come true. The world took the song exactly as sworn. It went to number 1, and it has never really left. It is played at wedding after wedding to this day, borrowed by young couples who were not even born when a tall boy hid in a girl's backseat outside a Dairy Queen. And in the video for it, the woman on the screen is not an actress. It is Denise. Of course it is Denise. There was never anybody else the song could possibly have been looking at. He had set the marriage to music, tears and all. 4 years later, the other half of the marriage would pick up a pen and answer him. Chapter 17. Denise, her side of the story. For 30 years, the story of Alan and Denise Jackson had been told, when it was told at all, in his voice, in his songs, through the lens of his fame. In 2007, the other half of the marriage sat down and told it in her own. Denise Jackson published a memoir, and she called it It's All About Him, that same title with the deliberate double meaning folded into it, the him that was God first and her husband second, the whole theology of her survival compressed into a phrase. And the flight attendant who had once walked up to Glenn Campbell in an airport turned out to be, surprising exactly no one who had been paying attention, the family's other natural storyteller. The gift for plain, true telling was not his alone. She had it too. She told all of it in her own voice, from her own side. The Dairy Queen and the penny and the backseat ambush. The county roads and the courtship and the little Baptist church. The airport and the nerve it took, and what it meant to be the one who believed before there was anything to believe on. The mailroom years and the long grind of almost. And then, because she was too honest a woman to write a book that skipped it, and because the skipping would have made the whole thing a lie, the crack in the marriage, and the separation, and the lowest point of her life. She wrote about the faith that met her there. She wrote about being rebuilt before she was reconciled. She wrote about choosing freely to forgive and to stay. What she did in writing it was extraordinary, and I want to name plainly what it cost. She was a private woman married to a private man, and she chose to make the most painful and humiliating passage of her marriage public, not for money, not for revenge, but because she had come to believe that her story could help other people. That somewhere out there was another woman sitting in the wreckage of a betrayal, certain her marriage was over and her worth was gone, and that this woman needed to hear from someone who had stood in that exact spot and found a way through it that did not require her to lie about how bad it had been. Denise wrote the book for that woman. She turned her own worst season into a map for strangers. I could not tell you how many marriages that book has quietly saved, because that kind of rescue does not make the news. But I can tell you the instinct behind it, because the whole shape of these two lives points to it. They had learned, better than anyone, that the pretty version helps nobody. A marriage that looks effortless from the outside is a postcard, nice to receive, useless to travel by. A marriage that admits exactly what it cost and shows you precisely how it was paid is not a postcard. That is a map, and a map is worth something to the people still lost. The Jacksons had been lost once and had found the way back, and they decided, she in her book, he in his song, to leave the map out where anyone who needed it could find it. The book became a bestseller across the whole country, which she found a little absurd and more than a little funny. The shy man's shy wife suddenly on a book tour, having to stand up in front of rooms and talk out loud about the God who had put her back together. She laughed about the irony of it, that in a family famous for a man who could not talk, she was the one who had ended up writing the words down. 2 people from Newnan, Georgia, each with a gift for saying true things simply, each of whom had used that gift, in their own medium, to tell the same story from opposite ends. And I want to sit for a moment with the sheer unlikeliness of who left that map. These were not confessional people by temperament. He was a man who could barely finish a sentence at a party. She was a private woman from a small town, raised to keep the family's business inside the family. Neither of them was built to open the door and let strangers walk through the wreckage of their worst year. That is exactly what makes the offering so serious. It went against the grain of both of them. They did it anyway, deliberately, because they had decided together that their privacy was worth less than somebody else's rescue. Very few famous couples ever make that trade. Most spend fortunes to hide precisely the thing the Jacksons chose to hand over for free. That map is the only reason a book like this one can honestly exist. Everything in it was given, not taken. And that is worth remembering as the story turns toward its last hard stretch of road, because there was one more secret coming, the heaviest one yet. And this time it would be handed to both of them at once, in a doctor's office, and Denise would become the keeper of it right alongside him. In 2011, at what looked from the outside like the untroubled height of everything, Alan quietly learned the name of a thing that had been following him for years. It was a hereditary disorder of the nerves, slow and relentless, working at the edges of the body first, the feet, the legs, the balance. It was not going to kill him. It was merely going to keep taking, a little at a time, from a man who made his living standing planted and steady at the center of a stage. Every diagnosis in a marriage is issued to two people. When the doctor named the disease, the wife heard it too. And the couple that had spent 35 years learning to carry the important things in silence now had the largest silent thing of all to carry between them. They told almost no one. He went back to work. In 2017, country music gave him its highest honor and put him in its Hall of Fame. The male hauler enshrined at last among the immortals, and the man at the podium and the wife in the seat below him both knew a thing that not one person in that celebrating room could see. She had been the keeper of everything the fame could not touch since 1990. Now she was the keeper of this too. Chapter 18. Alan, one more dance. For 10 years he kept the secret, and then, in the September of 2021, Alan Jackson decided that it had finally grown heavier than the telling of it. He went on national television and said it out loud, the name of the disease, the 10 years of silence, the plain fact that it was getting harder to move the way he wanted to up there under the lights. He said it with no self-pity at all. If anything, he was almost apologetic about it, visibly worried that it might come across as a complaint, as though a man had any business complaining who had been given the life he had been given. And then, being exactly who he had always been, he turned the thing from a tragedy into a plan. If his legs were going to put a clock on the music, then he, and not the disease, was going to decide how the music ended. He called the farewell tour Last Call, one more for the road. Sit with that name a moment, because it tells you everything about the man. That is not the title of someone being dragged unwilling from the stage. It is a bartender's phrase, friendly, unhurried, generous. One more round on the house before we all head home. He grinned when he explained it, the same sideways grin he had worn since he was the shyest boy in 3 counties, and he made it sound like the most natural thing in the world, closing the place down himself rather than waiting to be closed. He was not being defeated by anything. He was choosing to pour everyone one last drink on his way out. And the dates rolled out, city after city, each show another goodbye said properly and in full. No scandal ever chased Alan Jackson off a stage. No collapse in demand, no embarrassment, no slow fade into irrelevance. He got to do the thing almost no one in the whole punishing history of the music business ever gets to do. He left on his own terms, by his own hand, in his own time, with the same wife standing beside him who had been beside him when the entire enterprise was nothing but a demo tape in a flight attendant's carry-on bag. Which brings us at last all the way back to where this book began. Nissan Stadium, Nashville, the 27th of June, 2026. 80,000 people gathered under a wide summer sky, every last one of them there to say goodbye. They called the evening last call, one more for the road, the finale, and the guest list read like the family Bible of the whole format. One after another, the royalty of country music walked out to sing his songs back to him, an entire generation of stars, some of whom had grown up on his records, lining up to pay their respects to the tall, quiet man who had once hauled their industry's mail down a hallway and could not, in those days, get a single door in the town to open. And running underneath, the whole celebration was a purpose larger than any party. The night raised more than $2.25 million for research into the very disease that was taking his legs, the unwanted birthright he had carried in silence for a decade, turned, at the very last, into a gift for the strangers who will inherit it after him. Then the tribute stepped aside, and the tall man walked out under the lights one final time, 67 now, the walk more careful than it had once been, the voice still that low, easy screen door in summer, and he gave the people the songs. The river, the jukebox, the real world, the September questions that had once steadied a grieving country. 80,000 voices singing every word back at him, the way you sing when you know in your chest that it is the last time you will ever get to. And then came Remember When. You know the song by now. A whole chapter of this book was built on it. Sworn testimony, the entire marriage with the dates left in, the tears included, written alone by a man forecasting the far end of a love he had nearly lost and chosen to save. And as the first unhurried notes of it began, Alan Jackson brought out onto that enormous stage the one person this entire book has been about from its first page, Denise. The girl from the booth at the Dairy Queen, 50 years on. And there, in front of 80,000 witnesses and every camera in Tennessee, he took his wife into his arms, and the two of them danced. It was not a long dance. It could not be. The legs that had carried him through 40 years of shows had only so much left in them, and he had made his choice about how to spend what remained. He spent it on her, and that is the whole sermon of the night, if a farewell concert can be said to have one. A man with a limited and dwindling supply of something precious, steps, strength, time on his feet under the lights, was given the chance to spend the last of it however he wished, in front of the largest audience of his life. He did not spend it on a guitar solo or a soaring note held for the record books. He spent it holding his wife and turning slowly to a song he had written about her 23 years before. Everyone in that stadium had come to watch a legend perform. What they got to witness instead was a husband choosing at the last, the same thing he had chosen at 19 in a Baptist church, and again at 39 when the marriage nearly died. And here is what everyone who was there will tell you, the truest measure of what that night actually was. Nobody who tells the story of it starts with the set list. They lead with the dance. 80,000 people went quiet, and then they went to pieces all at once in the same breath, because every single person in that stadium understood exactly what they were being allowed to see. Not a performance, a vow kept in public. Better, worse, richer, poorer, in sickness and in health. The whole contract, sworn out by two children in Newnan, Georgia, in December of 1979, executed in full, one slow, careful turn at a time. On the final night of the working life it had carried the whole way. Epilogue. History does not record what he said to her when the music stopped. By now you know this book will not pretend that it does, and by now you understand that it does not matter in the slightest. Their first words to each other belong to them at a walk-up window in the summer of 1976. Their last slow dance under the lights belonged to them too. We were only ever borrowing the middle. So go back, one final time, to where it started. 50 years earlier, a tall boy stood at a Dairy Queen counter in a small Georgia town, studying a menu board he had known by heart since he was 6 years old, trying to find somewhere inside himself the courage to cross a room toward a girl with a dish of soft serve going soft in front of her. That walk took him the width of a room. And then it took him the length of Georgia, and up the highway to Nashville, and out to every place on earth where they play music. But watch him on that last night in June, turning slowly with the same girl while 80,000 people wept. And you understand at last the thing this whole book has been trying to tell you from the first melting dish of ice cream. The walk was always toward her. Everything else, the songs, the number ones, the 75 million records, the Hall of Fame, the whole roaring improbable career, everything else was only ever the scenery he passed on the way. I want to tell you what I think their story is, for now that you have the whole of it. It is not a story about fame, though fame runs all the way through it. It is a story about the difference between the love you fall into and the love you choose, and about how the second kind is the only kind that lasts. 2 kids fell into it at a Dairy Queen. Everything after that, the airport and the mailroom and the babies and the crack and the faith and the mending and the long secret and the last dance, all of it was choosing. Over and over, on purpose, in the dark, with no applause. That is the real work, and almost nobody sees it while it is happening, and it is the most beautiful thing 2 people can do with a life. The kitchen table where she waited up, the car he tuned so it would start in the cold, the paychecks she spent on a maybe, the vows renewed on their knees, the tears he put in the song when he could have left them out, the dance he spent his last good steps on. Add it all up, and it comes to a single sentence, the one this whole company was built to say, and I will give it to you plainly, because they earned every word of it the hard way. Love is hard. Love is worth it. Love stays. The walk was always toward her. It still is. And somewhere past the last camera, when the lights of that stadium finally went down, a tall, quiet man and the girl from the booth got in a car that started on the first try, because of course it did, and they drove the long way home. Author's note. This book is a work of dramatized biography, inspired by publicly available material about the lives of Alan Jackson and Denise Jackson. Alan and Denise are real people, and the milestones told here, the meeting in Newnan, the marriage, the move to Nashville, the songs, the separation and reconciliation, the diagnosis, and the farewell concert, are drawn from and held to the public record, including Denise Jackson's own memoir and the couple's many public interviews. Within that factual frame, the interior life has been dramatized. Private thoughts, feelings, motives, and unrecorded moments are imagined in service of the story, and no invented dialogue should be read as a verbatim quotation of anything these real people actually said. Where the record is silent, this book has tried to stay honest to the spirit of what is publicly known, and to treat the most painful chapter with the same gentleness the Jacksons themselves chose when they placed it, freely, on the public record for the good of others. Written by Barron.